On the evening of December 8, 1980, the English musician John Lennon, formerly of the Beatles, was shot and fatally wounded in the archway of the Dakota, his residence in New York City. The killer, Mark David Chapman, was an American Beatles fan who was envious of and enraged by Lennon's lifestyle, as well as his 1966 comment that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. Chapman stated that he was inspired by the fictional character Holden Caulfield from J.D. Salinger's novel The Catcher in the Rye, a phony killer who loathes hypocrisy. Chapman planned the killing over several months and waited for Lennon at the Dakota on the morning of December 8. Early in the evening, Chapman met Lennon, who signed his copy of the album Double Fantasy before leaving for a recording session at the record plant. Later that night, Lennon and his wife, Yoko Ono, returned to the Dakota to say goodnight to their son before going out for an impromptu date night. As Lennon and Ono approached the entrance of the building, Chapman fired 5 hollow-point bullets from a .38 special revolver, 4 of which hit Lennon in the back. Lennon was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital in a police car, where he was pronounced dead on arrival at 11:15 p.m. at the age of 40. Chapman remained at the scene reading The Catcher in the Rye until he was arrested by the police. It was later discovered that Chapman had considered Lennon's friend David Bowie as a potential target. A worldwide outpouring of grief ensued. Crowds gathered at Roosevelt Hospital, in front of the Dakota, and elsewhere, and at least 3 Beatles fans died by suicide. The day following the murder, Lennon was cremated at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York. Instead of a funeral, Ono requested 10 minutes of silence around the world. Chapman pleaded guilty to murdering Lennon and was sentenced to 20 years to life imprisonment. He has been denied parole 13 times since he became eligible in 2000. Background: Mark David Chapman. Mark David Chapman, a 25-year-old former security guard from Honolulu, Hawaii, was a fan of the Beatles with no prior criminal convictions. J.D. Salinger's novel The Catcher in the Rye, 1951, had taken on great personal significance for Chapman, to the extent that he wished to model his life after the novel's protagonist, Holden Caulfield. One of the novel's main themes is Caulfield's rage against adult hypocrisy and phonies. Chapman claimed that he had been enraged by Lennon's infamous and much-publicized 1966 remark that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, as well as by the lyrics of Lennon's song's God, in which Lennon states that he does not believe in the Beatles, God, or Jesus, and Imagine, where Lennon states, imagine no possessions despite having a lavish lifestyle, as depicted in Anthony Fawcett's 1976 book John Lennon, One Day at a Time. Chapman concluded that this made Lennon a phony. On October 27, 1980, Chapman purchased a 5-shot, .38 caliber Charter Arms revolver in Honolulu. He flew to New York City on October 29 after contacting the Federal Aviation Administration to learn the best way to transport a revolver. Chapman learned that bullets could have been damaged on the plane, so he arrived without ammunition. He left New York on November 12 or 13, then flew back on December 6 and checked into the Upper West Side YMCA for a night before moving to a Sheraton hotel in Midtown Manhattan. December 8, 1980, Chapman waited for Lennon outside the Dakota in the early morning and spent most of the day near the entrance to the building, talking to fans and the doorman. During that morning, Chapman was distracted and missed seeing Lennon step out of a taxi and enter the Dakota. Later in the morning, Chapman met Lennon's family nanny, Helen Seaman, who was returning from a walk with Lennon's 5-year-old son, Sean. Chapman reached in front of the housekeeper to shake Sean's hand and remarked that he was a beautiful boy, quoting Lennon's song, "Beautiful boy, darling boy." Here's a revised version of your text with corrections. Portrait photographer Annie Leibovitz went to the Lennons' apartment to do a photo shoot for Rolling Stone magazine. Leibovitz promised them that a photo of the two of them naked together would make the magazine's front cover. Leibovitz took several photos of John Lennon alone, and one was originally set to be on the cover. Although Yoko Ono did not want to be naked, Lennon insisted that both he and his wife appear on the cover. After taking the pictures, Leibovitz left their apartment at 3:30 p.m. After the photo shoot, Lennon gave what would be his last interview to San Francisco disc jockey Dave Sholin, writer Lori Kay, and recorder/producer Ron Hummel for a music show to be broadcast on the RKO radio network. At around 5 p.m., Lennon and Ono, delayed by a late limousine shared with the RKO radio crew, left their apartment to mix the song, Walking on Thin Ice, an Ono song featuring Lennon on lead guitar, at the record plant. As they left the building, Lennon and Ono were approached by Chapman, who asked for Lennon's autograph, a common practice, on a copy of his recently released album, Double Fantasy, 1980. Lennon enjoyed giving autographs or taking pictures, especially with those who had waited for long periods to meet him. Later, Chapman said, "He was very kind to me. Ironically, very kind and very patient with me. The limousine was waiting, and he took his time with me, and he got the pen going, and he signed my album. He asked me if I needed anything else. I said, no, sir. And he walked away. Very cordial and decent man." Paul Gorish, an amateur photographer and Lennon fan, took a photo of Lennon signing Chapman's album. Shooting. The Lennons returned to the Dakota at approximately 10:50 p.m. Lennon wanted to say goodnight to his son before going to the Stage Deli restaurant with Ono. Instead of driving into the more secure courtyard of the Dakota, the Lennons exited their limousine on 72nd Street. They passed Chapman and walked toward the archway entrance of the building. As Ono passed by, Chapman nodded at her. When Lennon passed by, he glanced briefly at Chapman, seemingly recognizing him from earlier. Seconds later, Chapman drew his revolver, which was concealed in his coat pocket, aimed at the center of Lennon's back, and rapidly fired 5 hollow-point bullets from a distance of about 9 to 10 feet, 2.7 to 3.0 m. Based on statements made that night by New York City Police Department, NYPD, Chief of Detectives James Sullivan, numerous reports at the time claimed that Chapman called out Mr. Lennon and dropped into a combat stance before firing. However, later court hearings and witness interviews did not include either of these details. Chapman later said that he does not remember calling out to Lennon before he fired, and that Lennon did not turn around. He claimed to have taken a combat stance in a 1992 interview with Barbara Walters. One bullet missed Lennon and struck a window of the Dakota. According to the autopsy report, 2 bullets entered the left side of Lennon's back, traveling through the left side of his chest and his left lung, with one exiting from the body and one lodging in his neck. 2 more bullets hit Lennon in his left shoulder. Lennon, bleeding profusely from his external wounds and from his mouth, staggered up 5 steps to the lobby, where he said, "I'm shot. I'm shot." He then fell to the floor, scattering cassettes that he was carrying. Jose Perdomo, the doorman, shook the revolver out of Chapman's hand and kicked it across the pavement. Concierge worker Jay Hastings first attempted to make a tourniquet, but upon ripping open Lennon's blood-stained shirt and realizing the severity of his injuries, he covered Lennon's chest with his uniform jacket, removed his blood-covered glasses, and summoned the police. Chapman removed his coat and had to show that he was not carrying any concealed weapons and remained standing on 72nd Street, waiting for the police to arrive. Underneath his coat, he wore a promotional t-shirt for Todd Rundgren's album Hermit of Mink Hollow. Perdomo shouted at Chapman, "Do you know what you just did?" To which Chapman calmly replied, "I just shot John Lennon." Officers Stephen Spiro and Peter Cullen were the first policemen to arrive at the scene. They were at 72nd Street and Broadway when they heard a report of shots fired at the Dakota. The officers arrived around 2 minutes after the shooting and found Chapman standing very calmly on 72nd Street reading a paperback copy of The Catcher in the Rye. They immediately put Chapman in handcuffs and placed him in the back seat of their squad car. Chapman made no attempt to flee or resist arrest. Cullen said of Chapman, "He apologized to us for ruining our night. I turned around and said to him, 'You've got to be fucking kidding me. You're worried about our night? Do you know what you just did to your life?' We read him his rights more than once." Officers Herb Frauenberger and Tony Palma were the second team to arrive on the scene. They found Lennon lying face down on the floor of the lobby, blood pouring from his mouth, and his clothing already soaked with it, with Hastings attending to him. Officers James Moran and Bill Gamble soon arrived as well. Frauenberger put Lennon in their car, concluding that his condition was too serious to wait for an ambulance to arrive. Moran and Gamble then drove Lennon to Roosevelt Hospital on West 59th Street, followed by Frauenberger and Palma, who drove Ono to the same location. According to Gamble, in the car, Moran asked, "Are you John Lennon?" or, "Do you know who you are?" Lennon nodded but could only manage a moaning and gurgling sound when he tried to speak, losing consciousness shortly thereafter. Resuscitation attempt and death. A few minutes before 11 p.m., Officer Moran arrived at Roosevelt Hospital with Lennon in his squad car. Moran carried Lennon on his back and placed him onto a gurney, urgently demanding a doctor for a multiple gunshot wound victim. When Lennon was brought in, he was not breathing and had no pulse. 3 doctors, a nurse, and 2 or 3 other medical attendants worked on Lennon for 10 to 20 minutes in an attempt to resuscitate him. As a last resort, the doctors performed a resuscitative thoracotomy, opening Lennon's chest in an effort to restore circulation, but they quickly discovered that the damage to the blood vessels above and around Lennon's heart from the bullet wounds was too severe. 3 of the 4 bullets that struck Lennon's back passed completely through his body and out of his chest, while the 4th lodged itself in his aorta, near his heart. One of the exiting bullets from his chest struck and lodged in his upper left arm. Several of the wounds could have been fatal on their own, as each bullet had ruptured vital arteries around the heart. Lennon was shot 4 times at close range with hollow-point bullets, which caused devastating damage to his organs, particularly his left lung and the major blood vessels above his heart. Reports regarding who operated on and attempted to resuscitate Lennon have been inconsistent. Stephen Lynn, the head of the emergency department at Roosevelt Hospital, is often credited with performing the surgery. In 2005, Lynn stated that he massaged Lennon's heart and attempted to resuscitate him for 20 minutes, that 2 other doctors were present, and that the 3 of them declared Lennon's death. Richard Marks, an emergency room surgeon at Roosevelt Hospital, claimed in 1990 that he operated on Lennon, administered a massive blood transfusion, and provided heart massage to no avail. "When I realized he wasn't going to make it," Marks said, "I just sewed him back up. I felt helpless." David Halloran, who was a 3rd-year general surgery resident at Roosevelt Hospital at the time, disputed the accounts of both Marks and Lynn. In 2015, Halloran stated that the 2 doctors didn't do anything and that he initially did not realize the identity of the victim. He added that Lynn only came to assist him after hearing that the victim was Lennon. According to his death certificate, Lennon was pronounced dead on arrival at 11:15 p.m., though the time of 11:07 p.m. has also been reported. Witnesses noted that the Beatles' song, "All My Loving," was playing over the hospital's sound system at the moment Lennon was pronounced dead. Lennon's body was then taken to the city morgue at 520 First Avenue for an autopsy. The cause of death was reported on his death certificate as hypovolemic shock, caused by the loss of more than 80% of blood volume due to multiple through-and-through gunshot wounds to the left shoulder and left chest, resulting in damage to the left lung, the left subclavian artery, and both the aorta and aortic arch. According to the report, even with prompt medical treatment, no person could have lived for more than a few minutes with multiple bullet wounds affecting all of the major arteries and veins around the heart. Media announcement. Ono requested that Roosevelt Hospital not report her husband's death to the media until she had informed their 5-year-old son, Sean, who was still at home at the Dakota. She was concerned that Sean, likely watching television, might learn of his father's death from a TV announcement. However, news producer Alan J. Weiss of WABC-TV happened to be waiting for treatment in the emergency room after being injured in a motorcycle crash earlier in the evening. Police officers wheeled Lennon into the same room as Weiss and mentioned what had happened. Weiss immediately called his station and relayed the information. ABC News President Roone Arledge received word of Lennon's death during the final moments of a national telecast of a Monday night football game between the New England Patriots and the Miami Dolphins, with the game tied and the Patriots about to attempt a field goal to win. Arledge informed Frank Gifford and Howard Cosell of the shooting and suggested they report the murder. Cosell, who had interviewed Lennon during a Monday night football broadcast in 1974, was chosen to deliver the news, but initially hesitated. Gifford urged Cosell, saying, "You've got to. If you know it, we've got to do it. Don't hang on it. It's a tragic moment, and this is going to shake up the whole world." The news was delivered as follows. Cosell, "But the game has suddenly been placed in total perspective for us. I'll finish this. They're in the hurry-up offense." Gifford, "3rd down 4. Chuck Foreman, it'll be 4th down. Matt Kavanaugh will let it run down for one final attempt. He'll let the seconds tick off to give Miami no opportunity whatsoever." Whistle blows. Timeout is called with 3 seconds remaining. John Smith is on the line. "And I don't care what's on the line. Howard, you've got to say what we know in the booth." Cosell, "Yes, we have to say it. Remember, this is just a football game, no matter who wins or loses." An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous, perhaps, of all the Beatles, shot twice in the back, rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival. Hard to go back to the game after that newsflash, which, in duty bound, we have to take. Frank Gifford, after a pause, "Indeed, it is." The first official confirmation of Lennon's death apparently came from Steve North, the news director for Long Island radio station WLIR. According to North and disc jockey Bob Waugh, North was doing a special commentary on the recent murder of gun control advocate Dr. Michael J. Halberstam when an intern ran in with the news about Lennon. North then read the AP Wire bulletin and spoke several times with a police contact, who was finally able to confirm Lennon had died. Waugh has since released an air check from that night. New York rock station WNEW immediately suspended all programming and opened its lines to calls from listeners. Stations throughout the country switched to special programming devoted to Lennon and Beatles music. Reactions. Lennon's associates. According to Stephen Lynn, when he informed Ono of Lennon's death, she banged her head against the concrete floor of Roosevelt Hospital. However, his account is disputed by 2 nurses who were present at the time. In a 2015 interview, Ono denied hitting her head on the floor, stating that her chief concern was to remain calm and take care of her son, Sean. She was eventually led away from the hospital by a policeman and Geffen Records president David Geffen. The following day, Ono issued a statement: "There is no funeral for John. Later in the week, we will set the time for a silent vigil to pray for his soul. We invite you to participate from wherever you are at the time. John loved and prayed for the human race. Please pray the same for him. Love, Yoko and Sean." George Harrison issued a prepared statement for the press. "After all we went through together, I had and still have great love and respect for him. I am shocked and stunned. To rob a life is the ultimate robbery in life. The perpetual encroachment on other people's spaces taken to the limit with the use of a gun. It is an outrage that people can take other people's lives when they obviously haven't got their own lives in order." Harrison later privately told friends, "I just wanted to be in a band. Here we are, 20 years later, and some whack job has shot my mate. I just wanted to play guitar in a band." Paul McCartney addressed reporters outside his Sussex home that morning, saying, "I can't take it at the moment. John was a great man who will be remembered for his unique contributions to art, music, and peace. He is going to be missed by the whole world." Later that day, McCartney was leaving an Oxford Street recording studio when reporters asked for his reaction. He responded with, "Drag, isn't it? Okay, cheers, bye-bye." His apparently casual response was widely criticized. McCartney later explained that he had intended no disrespect and was simply unable to articulate his feelings, given the shock and sadness he felt over Lennon's murder. Reflecting on the day 2 years later, McCartney said, "How did I feel? I can't remember. I can't express it. I can't believe it. It was crazy. It was anger. It was fear. It was madness. It was the world coming to an end. And it was, will it happen to me next? I just felt everything. I still can't put it into words. Shocking." And I ended up saying, "It's a drag. And that doesn't really sum it up." Ringo Starr, who was in the Bahamas at the time, received a phone call from his stepchildren informing him about the murder. He immediately flew to New York to console Ono and spent time with Sean. In a 1995 interview with New Musical Express magazine, Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards revealed that he was just a few miles south of the Dakota, on Fifth Avenue, when he found out about Lennon's murder. Richards was so disturbed by the news that he obtained a firearm of his own and went searching the streets for the alleged killer. Public response. Per Ono's wishes, on December 14th, millions of people around the world paused for 10 minutes of silence to remember Lennon. This included 30,000 people gathered in Lennon's hometown of Liverpool and over 225,000 people at the Naumbig Bandshell in Central Park, close to the scene of the shooting. During those 10 minutes, every radio station in New York City went off the air. At least 3 Beatles fans died by suicide after the murder, leading Ono to make a public appeal asking mourners not to give in to despair. On January 18, 1981, a full-page open letter from Ono appeared in the New York Times and the Washington Post. Titled In Gratitude, it expressed thanks to the millions of people who mourned Lennon's loss and wanted to know how they could commemorate his life and help her and Sean. Double Fantasy, which was released 3 weeks before Lennon's murder to mix critical reactions and initially unremarkable sales, became a worldwide commercial success and won the 1981 Grammy Award for Album of the Year at the 24th Annual Grammy Awards. Ono released a solo album, Season of Glass, in 1981. The cover of the album is a photograph of Lennon's blood-spattered glasses that he was wearing when he was shot. That same year, she also released Walking on Thin Ice, the song the Lennons had mixed at the record plant less than an hour before he was murdered, as a single. The attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan by John Hinckley Jr. took place 3 months after Lennon's murder, and the police found a copy of The Catcher in the Rye among Hinckley's personal belongings. Hinckley left a cassette tape in his hotel room on which he stated that he mourned Lennon's death and wanted to make some kind of statement after Lennon's death. In June 2016, Jay Hastings, the Dakota concierge who tried to help Lennon, sold the shirt he was wearing that night, stained with Lennon's blood, at an auction for $42,500. Aftermath. The day after the murder, Lennon's remains were cremated at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, and his ashes were scattered in Central Park, within sight of the Dakota. Chapman was taken to the NYPD's 20th Precinct on West 82nd Street, where he was questioned for 8 hours before being brought to New York County Criminal Court on Center Street in Lower Manhattan. A judge remanded Chapman to Bellevue Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. Chapman was charged with the second-degree murder of Lennon, as premeditation in New York State was not sufficient to warrant a charge of first-degree murder. Despite advice from his lawyers to plead insanity, Chapman pleaded guilty to the murder, stating that his plea was the will of God. Under the terms of his plea, Chapman was sentenced to 20 years to life imprisonment with eligibility for parole in 2000. Before his sentencing, he was given the opportunity to address the court, during which he read a passage from The Catcher in the Rye. As of March 2024, he has been denied parole 13 times and remains incarcerated at Green Haven Correctional Facility. Memorials and tributes. Photography. Leibovitz's photo of a naked Lennon embracing his wife, taken on the day of his murder, was featured on the cover of the January 22, 1981 issue of Rolling Stone. The issue was largely dedicated to articles, letters, and photographs commemorating Lennon's life and death. In 2005, the American Society of Magazine Editors ranked it as the top magazine cover of the last 40 years. Events. Every December 8th, a remembrance ceremony is held in front of the Capitol Records building on Vine Street in Hollywood, California. People also light candles in front of Lennon's Hollywood Walk of Fame star, located outside the Capitol building. From 28 to September 30, 2007, Durness hosted the John Lennon Northern Lights Festival, attended by Lennon's half-sister, Julia Baird, who read from his writings and her own books, and Stanley Parks, Lennon's Scottish cousin. Ono places a lit candle in the window of Lennon's room in the Dakota every year on December 8th. Every October 9th, Lennon's birthday, through December 8th, the date Lennon was shot, the imagined Peace Tower in Iceland is illuminated. On March 24, 2018, Paul McCartney participated in the March for Our Lives, a protest against gun violence, in memory of Lennon's killing. Music. Bob Dylan wrote and recorded the song Roll on John for his 2012 album Tempest, which explicitly refers to the assassination. They shot him in the back and down he went. David Bowie, who befriended Lennon and collaborated on Bowie's US #1 hit Fame in 1975, performed a tribute to Lennon during the final show of his Serious Moonlight tour at the Hong Kong Coliseum on December 8, 1983, the 3rd anniversary of Lennon's death. Bowie mentioned that he last saw Lennon in Hong Kong and performed Lennon's song Imagine. David Gilmour of Pink Floyd wrote and recorded the song Murder, in response to Lennon's death, released on his 1984 album About Face. George Harrison released a tribute song, All Those Years Ago, 1981, featuring Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney. Elton John, who recorded the US #1 hit, Whatever Gets You Through the Night, with Lennon, teamed up with his lyricist Bernie Taupin for the tribute, Empty Garden, Hey Hey Johnny. The song appeared on his album Jump Up, 1982, and peaked at number 13 on the US singles chart that year. During a sold-out concert at Madison Square Garden in August 1982, Elton John performed the song and was joined on stage by Ono and Sean. Paul McCartney released his tribute, Here Today, on his 1982 album Tug of War. Paul Simon's homage to Lennon, the late great Johnny Ace, begins by referencing the rhythm and blues singer Johnny Ace, who reportedly shot himself in 1954 and later mentions John Lennon, as well as President John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1963, the year Beatlemania began. The song appears on Simon's Hearts and Bones, 1983, album. Queen performed Imagine the Night After Lennon's death at Wembley Arena in London. Freddie Mercury wrote Life is Real, song for Lennon, as a tribute to John Lennon. The song appeared on Queen's 1982 album Hot Space. The Bellamy Brothers mentioned Lennon's death in their 1985 single, Old Hippie. The Cranberries' 1996 album To the Faithful Departed includes a song about the murder titled, I Just Shot John Lennon. XTC performed Rain and Towers of London in Liverpool the night after Lennon's death. The Chameleons' 1983 album script of the bridge features a song about the murder, Here Today, written from Lennon's perspective. Physical memorials. In 1985, New York City dedicated an area of Central Park, where Lennon had frequently walked, directly across from the Dakota, as Strawberry Fields. In a symbolic show of unity, countries from around the world donated trees, and the city of Naples, Italy, contributed the Imagine mosaic centerpiece. On October 9, 2007, Ono dedicated a memorial called the Imagine Peace Tower on the island of Vai, off the coast of Reykjavik, Iceland. Each year, between October 9 and December 8, it projects a vertical beam of light high into the sky in Lennon's memory. In 2009, the New York City annex of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame hosted a special John Lennon exhibit that included many mementos and personal effects from Lennon's life, as well as the clothes he was wearing when he was murdered, still in the brown paper bag from Roosevelt Hospital. In 2018, Ono created an artwork in John Lennon's memory titled Sky for MTA Arts and Design. The artwork was installed during the renovation of the 72nd Street station on the New York City subway, served by the B and C trains, located outside the Dakota. Operas. Former president of Croatia Ivo Josipovic composed an opera titled Lennon, which deals with the murder of John Lennon. In the opera, Lennon experiences a series of flashbacks during the murder, recalling the most important moments and people in his life. Biographical films. The Killing of John Lennon, 2006, directed by Andrew Piddington, focuses on Chapman's life leading up to the murder. Chapter 27, 2007, a drama directed by Jarrett Schaefer based on Jack Jones's book Let Me Take You Down, attempts a non-judgmental portrayal of Chapman. The Lennon Report, 2016, focuses on the attempts by doctors and nurses to save Lennon's life. Conspiracy theories. The Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, spied on Lennon due to his left-wing activism. Some conspiracy theories regarding Lennon's murder suggest CIA involvement. Fenton Bressler, a barrister and journalist, proposed the idea of CIA involvement in his 1990 book Who Killed John Lennon? He suggested that Chapman may have been brainwashed by the CIA as an assassin, akin to the Manchurian Candidate. Liverpool playwright Ian Carroll staged a drama, One Bad Thing, conveying the theory that Chapman was manipulated by a rogue wing of the CIA that wanted Lennon out of the picture. Salvador Estrisha argued in his 2004 book Rethinking John Lennon's Assassination, the FBI's war on rock stars, that forensic evidence proves Chapman did not commit the murder. The 2010 documentary The Day John Lennon Died suggests that Jose Perdomo, the doorman at the Dakota, was a Cuban exile with links to the CIA and the Bay of Pigs invasion.